Welcome to the Thursday, September 1st meeting of the Land Use and Natural Resources Committee for SACOG. Will everybody please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you, everybody. Okay, Robert, any housekeeping items?
Yeah, just a few housekeeping items. As you just heard, this meeting is being recorded and streamed over the internet. For members of the public, we accept and encourage public comment and have provided options that are listed at the top of this meeting agenda. For committee members attending in person today, thank you for coming. Please note that you have a table microphone in front of you. Please don't pick up or move the table mics. You can speak at a normal volume. Please simply hit the button to unmute yourself. Green means you are unmuted, red means you are muted. For our committee members participating online, thank you for joining us today. Please mute your devices when you're not speaking and use the raise hand feature in Zoom should you wish to comment. Would you like me to go to roll call?
Yes, please.
All right. Directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Bulahan?
Here.
Frost? Absent. Gallardo?
Here.
Gore?
Here.
Harris?
Here.
Kennedy? Absent. New?
Here.
West?
Here.
Vice Chair Baines?
Present.
Vice Chair Clark-Kretz?
Here.
And Chair Saragosa?
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right, thank you. And we'll go ahead and move on. Robert, do we have any public communications this afternoon?
There is no public comment.
All right, thank you. Moving right along then to the consent items. Any questions on consent? I'll entertain a motion.
New moves for approval.
Second by Baines.
All right. Seeing no further comments, can we do roll call, please?
All right. Directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bulahan?
Yes.
Frost? Absent. Gallardo?
Yes.
Gore?
Aye.
Harris?
Yes.
Kennedy? Absent. New?
Aye.
West?
Aye.
Vice Chair Baines?
Aye.
Vice Chair Clark-Kretz?
Yes.
And Chair Saragosa?
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you. I can see Bonnie now too. Okay, the video, the camera moved, so hi, Bonnie. All right, so we have two information items this afternoon for us. The first one I'm really excited about hearing as well. So this is item 3, and this is on the Sunrise Marketplace and reimagining the 100-acre mall. And Mr. Chu has this for us this afternoon.
Okay. I'm Greg Chu. I'm on the planning staff at SACOG. Our group has been working with many of your jurisdictions on some revitalization efforts of major corridors or neighborhoods or main streets the last several years. And we're always looking for good examples within the region or anywhere of how to revitalize the planning efforts that are involved and what it takes to get going. So today we've got Casey Kempenaar from the city of Citrus Heights. He's the community development director. He's going to walk through kind of what the city has been doing for the former Sunrise Mall. It's a 100-acre site. A lot has been happening. I'll let him tell you all about that. So Casey's been with the city for a very long time, has worked his way up and is now the community development director, and he'll be here to tell you all about this. This is, the agenda says 5 minutes, but it's, we've scheduled it for, we had planned for about a 20-minute item, including Q&A. So with that, Jessica, would you mind pulling up the PowerPoint, and I'll turn it over to Casey.
Thanks, Greg. Can you guys all hear me okay?
We can.
It's a pleasure to be here today to go over this project. I know as I've been here 15 years, and I know many of you have been here much longer, and I've just heard the stories of prior to that 15 years. You know, this place was the place to be in the region, and man, there were some really good stories that we heard about what this was like back in the day, from the cruising to the restaurants that were there and everything else. So there's a lot of emotional attachment to the site, and it really made it even more acute that we needed to bring it back to its former prominence. So I'll kind of walk through how we got here and what we did. So next slide, please. So really what sparked a lot of this planning effort was years and years of previous developers had considered doing projects on the mall and just never could make it work. Then in 2018, the bulk of the mall was purchased by an owner outside of New York City, and they were more of a landowner. They weren't really developers, but they had these plans to cut up the mall and put a gas station and a couple of drive-throughs out in the parking lot. And we really said, you know what, that's not really what we have envisioned here, but we also didn't have a plan in place to really support what we thought would go there. So then in 2019, our council directed us to amend the general plan, which you see here on this page, which basically says we need to stop focusing on this area as a commercial area and need to look at it more of a neighborhood. And then it really directed us to prepare a specific plan to look at this property in a holistic manner. It's a 100-acre site, as Greg mentioned, which really is the cornerstone for our city from an economic development perspective. So really this kind of put the brakes on any development occurring out there and directed us to prepare a specific plan for the site. Next slide, please. So I think most of you know what a specific plan is, but really it really is a soup to nuts plan for the site on what regulations apply for the site, how we can address any environmental challenges with the site. And then we really built on the principle of flexibility because we know it's a 100-acre site. It's going to take a number of years to redevelop. And we know how fast the market changes now. So we wanted to make sure we could follow the market in terms of the development pattern that happened out there. Next slide, please. So the purpose was to create a specific plan to realize the city's general plan goal of transforming the site into a regional destination once again, and really introducing new uses that haven't been out there. It's 1.1 million square feet of retail, not a single square foot of office or residential out there. So really introducing uses that haven't ever existed there. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit of the history in a nutshell. The mall opened in 1971, and for a couple of decades, or maybe 3 decades, it was just the place to be. When we incorporated in 1997, there was a really long fight for incorporation, and a lot of that fight had to do with the tax revenue from the mall itself. So incorporation, that was our big asset. And then over the years, the mall, underwent renovations, and then we had 20-year celebration cityhood, and then shortly thereafter the new property owner purchased the mall, and that's was really the impetus for us to really look at this holistically. And then again in 2019 we hired Gensler as a firm to help us go through this process, and then we started right before COVID. We started the visioning workshops. You can see the picture in the bottom there. That was a interesting dynamic. That was in an empty Sears building where we had 300 people come to a workshop and participate and talk about what they'd like to see there. So it was kind of a Twilight Zone kind of thing going on. Next slide, please. And this slide just shows another picture from that workshop, and really people just couldn't help themselves but explain how it used to be the heart of the community where people would hang out. And we knew that sentimental value was there, and we needed to kind of respect that, but also plan for the future. Next slide, please. We also knew that Sacramento this region is growing quickly. And there's, as you can see here from the quote from Barry Broom, 500,000 people coming here in the next 2 decades. We needed vision to really attract those people. The run-of-the-mill suburbs isn't necessarily what's attracting people. So we need to give them something to really draw them in. Next slide, please. So this is a site today. As you can see, it's just under 100 acres. It's got about 1.4 million square feet of building on it. So it's about 25 acres of building and 75 acres of surplus parking. I don't know if any of you have been out there on even Black Friday. There's quite a bit of surplus parking still, even on the busiest shopping day of the year. What I'd like to point out on this slide is that there are multiple ownerships. Right now, there's 4 owners. The main parcel B and parcel D and parcel F there on this map are all owned by the Namdar Group. Parcel C was recently listed for sale by Seritage, which was the REIT that had purchased Sears in the past, and they're kind of liquidating all their assets at the moment. Next slide, please. And this is just a picture of what the mall looks like today. It's somewhere in the 60% vacancy at the moment. Next slide, please. So really that resulted in our plan was to develop a new heart for the city, a place where people could come hang out again. Next slide. So the plan is to transform it essentially into a new main street for the city, where we have a regional destination. It also has an economic component and supports a high quality of life for our residents. Next slide. And so that vision is premised on 5 big ideas that if you read through the plan, these are interwoven throughout the plan. Number 1 is returning it to a community and regional destination, but doing that with a green network. As you saw in the aerial photo, it's almost all asphalt or building. So really restoring some green space to the site. The plan allows or calls for about 25 acres of that to be open space. We also recognize that both Sunrise and Greenback are not necessarily designed for people, they're designed for cars. So we recognize that the streets and connections to the site need to be improved to be streets for people. So those are streets that are narrower, easier to walk on, and provide safe and efficient access to the site. Delivering neighborhoods that are livable, so a mix of housing products and affordability levels. And then last but not least, returning it to an economic engine for the city and the region. Next slide, please. So to do that, it really needs a holistic approach that incorporates all these activities, that makes it a 24-hour destination instead of a 8 to 5 destination. So introducing these different uses and incorporating these various features really helps bring it to a place where you can show up in the morning and stay all day, have a beer after work, that kind of thing. That's something that we don't really have a lot of right now. So event programming, a main street that is walkable and has shops on the ground floor with residential and office above, community activities, experiential retail, family entertainment, brew pubs, indoor outdoor dining, etc. Next slide, please. If you could scroll down just a bit, what I really want to call your attention to is the second table there. It shows the total number for the allowed development. So this is what the specific plan will allow as a ceiling. So up to 2,200 units of residential, 480 hotel rooms. You can see the retail footprints shrunk dramatically from 1.1 million down to 320,000 square feet, introducing nearly 1 million square feet of office, allows for community institutional uses. And then actually the parking is, the number of parking spaces is identical to what's there today. Next slide, please. And so this is a rendering of what this could look like if, as envisioned in the plan. This shows kind of an interim step where both Penny's and Macy's stay there. You can see number 6, those anchors are we planned around them. No one really knows how retail is going to evolve over the next couple decades. So we plan for a future where those could remain, or in the future where they can be redeveloped into something else. So in the center of the site where you see number 3, that's the main street. It goes north-south through the site. Sorry, north to the left of the screen. And that's really where you have retail shops with different uses above that. On the south end of the site, you have a kind of entertainment area. And then along the perimeter of the site is really the residential core that transitions into the residential areas to the south and east of the site. Number 10 shows Sunrise Boulevard will have someday bus rapid transit. At the meantime, we have high quality transit. So we have planned a transit station along Sunrise Boulevard that will allow for current transit to work, but also will give enable us to tie to bus rapid transit in the future. Next slide, please. So this is a rendering of what it could look like if you are this picture is kind of, if you're looking from Sunrise Boulevard to the east, and you can see the large park feature that's in the front with the event tent. Really, this is meant for be an area where there's restaurants that will spill out into the park to do events. There could be food trucks, there could be yoga in the park, all sorts of events can occur there. And really that's part of the programming that really makes this project work. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, you could skip this one too. And again, just reminding what it looks like today. This is again the Sears building. Next slide, please. And then this is what it could look like in the future. A mix of uses, like I said, hotel, office, we don't have now. Housing for workforce, we don't have any housing on the site. Food and dining, and then really a focus on walkability and being connected between all these uses across the 100 acres. Next slide, please. So we know 100 acres is a big chunk to bite off, especially when there's 1 million square feet of existing buildings on the site. So really wanted to focus on how we can phase this project. I'll point out that there's no required phasing as part of the project or the EIR. This is just kind of conceptually what we think is the most logical to happen in all that surplus parking that we have. So we could see that along the perimeter of the site, the mall can continue to operate as long as it's the market supports it. And then the earlier phases are likely to include the residential along the perimeter of the site and maybe some of the food and beverage along the Sunrise Boulevard corridor. Next slide, please. And as you can see, really focusing on the perimeter of the site, all that surplus parking, and then introducing employment center on the greenback side there. And then next slide, please. Phase 3 is really where the core of that higher density mixed use development would occur with the Main Street. And then next slide, please. Phase 4 would be, ultimately, if those big boxes were to go away, those could be torn down and redeveloped into a more mixed use area. Next slide. So what does this all mean? A project like this is a $1 billion project. So it's quite the investment, but it also reaps great returns for the city. This wasn't necessarily our focus, obviously, but it does help. So there's abundance of property and sales tax and TOT tax, which is something we currently don't really have much of. So these are all revenue sources that we would like to see increase as a result of this. Next slide, please. The key takeaway on this is this would be a site where you have 12 million visitors a year, and really it's a jobs creator as well. Next slide. So this is a rendering of what the site could look like at build out. Again, you can see this is looking over Sunrise Boulevard. In this particular slide, you can see the big box stores in the center of the site are kind of still there, the Pennies and the Macy's. And if you skip to the next slide, it'll show what that would look like if those were to go away. So that is a lot about our 100-acre Sunrise Mall site in just a short amount of time. I'm happy to answer any questions. There's a lot of complexities and nuance to this, and we're working hard to work with development partners to really unlock the site and really focus on infrastructure to serve the site right now behind the scenes. But there's sure a lot of community excitement about this project and really anxiously waiting to see this move forward.
Thank you, Casey. That was a lot to get through, so I appreciate it. That's a ton here, and it's really exciting. So just want to go ahead and open it up for any questions or comments.
I've got a question, if you can hear me.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Casey. Love the vision. It reminds me of our visit in Salt Lake City recently about the area that they redeveloped. As far as housing units, how many housing units might we see there? And do you have some prospective developers that are looking at providing housing there?
Yeah, so the plan allows up to 2,200 units. On the onset of the plan, we did a market analysis to see what the market would support. And that was pre-COVID. So at this point, I don't think anyone knows what's going to happen, but I think 1,300 was the bottom end. And for us, multifamily is really hot right now. So I think that's going to continue to be the driver of the plan. In terms of developers, yes, we are working with the owners. There was a significant education component to that. For some of the owners being out of state, they're not familiar with this thing called CEQA or any of the hoops that we have to jump through here. So we've spent a considerable amount of time working with them and pairing them with development partners. Most of them are landowners, not developers. So we're working to develop relationships with those folks.
Great, thank you.
Yes, Director Harris.
Yes, thank you. Casey, thank you very much for the presentation. Very impressive, and I have to say I'm probably more than a little jealous. So, but I do have a question for you. With adding all the capacity and like Bonnie said, the residential, how is your current infrastructure as far as getting water and sewer to that location? Is it definitely going to have to ramp it up a little bit with funding sources and the plans for that?
Yeah, actually, I've been here 15 years and we've been lucky on infrastructure, like mainline infrastructure has never really been a problem. So in this particular site, there is the mainline infrastructures in Sunrise and Greenback. And as part of the EIR, we evaluated capacity, and there's still plenty of capacity on those main stems. Obviously, we have to kind of rip out the old stuff on site to tie into that. And that's still a considerable amount of infrastructure investment. And so we're evaluating EFIDs or CFD approaches to help see if the city can have a little support of the infrastructure, because we know it's a big lift. And so we have an RFP on the street right now asking for some assistance from a consultant to help us do that and look at it a little more closely.
Thank you.
Yes, Vice Chair Clark Kretz.
Yeah, super exciting to see this presentation. I am one of the people that used to cruise my 1974 Camaro Type Old T Z28 around that building and bought all my gowns for dances, and that was the place we shopped. There's nothing for the Lumisites to shop other than I think there was a McDonald's department store in Roseville Square, but and that was actually pre this as well. And I just have always wondered what was going to happen to this. And I have a couple questions. What's happening with Birdcage Walk? I very rarely go down to your area, so sorry if that's a dumb question, but how is that also like low vacancy rate or high?
Yeah, actually, their Birdcage is pretty healthy as compared to the mall. They have a pretty healthy tenant mix, and they've done some reinvestment in there recently. So they're excited for the project because the spillover effect. They're doing some remodeling now. We had a sports authority there that has closed with their bankruptcy, and that's now becoming a gym. They've looked at opportunities to introduce housing there as well. So there's some movement there. It's a little bit further behind, but I think that they know they have an asset there that can be changed into something a little bit more. I think that'll come in the future.
Yeah, and I always, when I was a young kid, I always wondered, where's all the windows in this mall? It was always kind of weird to me. I was like, what? And I'm just super excited. I think it's a brilliant plan, and I'm really excited for your city. It's great.
Thank you.
Yes, Director Gallardo.
Thank you. Well, like Director Kett said, I am so excited. This if I couldn't get a ride, then we would go to Country Club Mall, but that was not nearly as much fun as when we could get the ride out to Sunrise Mall because we were living large. And it was just such a social place. And that's where we went to the movies. That whole area was just really exciting and just the nicest place to go. And so it was really disheartening the last, it's been a while to see it go down, and a lot of changes in the neighborhood. I know that I think it's Arcadia right across the street is where the transit station was always. And part of the problem was just the traffic in that area has been a challenge. I know working for the school district, even having San Juan High down the road, we had to pull some programs out because of that traffic impact. So I'm just curious what are the plans there for Greenback and Sunrises, and also Madison and Sunrise are tough traffic areas. What's the intent there to see how we're going to move traffic?
Sure. Yeah, that was a common community concern as well about how we handle traffic. back from the mall's heyday, they're still down about 40, I want to say about 40%. Don't quote me on that, but the traffic has dropped considerably over the last couple decades from its heyday. So there's a lot of capacity in the roadway still. Yes, during that peak hour, we will see some congestion, but right now, if you look at the number of trips on Sunrise that are stopping, it's somewhere in the 60% are just passing through, not stopping in the city. And that doesn't work from an economic development perspective. We need the Rockland folks traveling to Rancho Cordova to stop and spend money here. So a little congestion can help with that and make them see what they're missing. So we also are incorporating the transit center, and I think transit's going to continue to improve, and that connection through Sunrise down to 50 will continue to help. And I think the bus rapid transit has a lot of potential, and we look forward to seeing that come. There will be some congestion, of course, but I think that comes with the territory.
And you're spot on. I will admit it. I go there now when I'm going to Fair Oaks for something. That's the only way I know is just drive all the way down Sunrise, popping off on the freeway at Douglas. So I think that will be quite the challenge. But I'm really hoping that you'll have some, like you said, what you talked about, some areas that bring people there. Old school, you had Farrell's there, and that's where everybody went if you wanted to get ice cream. So I'm looking forward to seeing some fun things and bringing some life back in there. But I think the two pieces that just knowing that area as well as I do would be the traffic, and then some safety concerns, because that just happened in that area. There were some challenges. So I'm hoping this will make the changes to make that happen. I'm really excited for all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question in regards to sort of your community outreach and how that went, because I know it's always a challenge when any entity goes about a dramatic change to an area, or piece of dirt to a building, whatever. So just wondering what the feedback was from the community. Obviously it's gone, you've had vacancies over the last few years, but just wondering how that how that dialogue went and what the city did to kind of educate and bring these plans forward.
Sure. Yeah, I think we benefited from the nostalgia that people had on the site, that if you're going to put density, this is the spot to do it. And I think, most people acknowledge the fact that something needs to happen, and the excitement behind it. Really, what was interesting to me was we had people from Fair Oaks and Carmichael, which would never normally come to a public workshop in Citrus Heights, but they wanted to see what was going on, and they really were just excited to see some changes. So overall, community outreach was probably it was a significant piece. We had a couple workshops, one workshop in the Sears that had over 300 people, which was huge for us. And then we transitioned to virtual, and we still had over 100 people on those two virtual workshops we had. So really, I think people were just engaged and excited about the future. And if anything, they're like, why does this take 20 years to build out 100 acres? They're just excited for it to happen. And, that's a tough thing to explain, how slow things move here in California, but they, I think that most people got it and are excited about it. We didn't really have a lot of pushback or concerns. Like I said, traffic may have been the main concern we heard about. There were a few folks that were nostalgia and wanted to see some of the buildings remain. And we kind of explained that those buildings can remain. We were not saying they have to come down, but we're going to set it up to follow the market. And when it's time, we have the tools in place to make those decisions at that time.
Great, thank you. And then just a question on the housing. Do you foresee any of those being for purchase, or is this mostly going to be apartment style housing?
I think it'll be a mix. Yeah, we have lower density down to, like, I think lowest part is about 12 units per acre, which would be kind of like a townhome. But we have other development sites that would be up to 100 units per acre. So we have quite the range. And I think it'll be a mix of flats and townhomes and apartments.
That's great to hear. It's always one of my things is I love to see the density and the affordable housing, but I always want to be able to see a path for home ownership as well, and to have those units available. So it's great to hear.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right. Seeing none. Casey, thank you very much. I think I can speak for everybody that we're really excited for what's going on in Citrus Heights, and seeing this come along, watching this come along. So one last thing, just so when do you sort of anticipate even like the first shovel in the ground?
Oh man, that's a tough one to answer. There's a lot of moving pieces behind the scene. I would say, it's still probably a year or two out before we see some movement there.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you, Casey. Appreciate it. We'll look for updates on this. And best of luck. So thank you very much.
So much
Chair
for having
Chair
me.
Saragosa, can I just say?
Yes, absolutely.
It's always hard between the real and the virtual world here but anyway, yeah, Casey, great presentation, and kudos on all the city's efforts and your efforts. It's clear to me whenever we talk about this project, and even just the testimonials we just heard, is in some ways Sunrise Mall, this project is unique, right? People have a unique relationship to it. It's special, it's different. But what's not unique is the fact that you all have a lot of retail and aging retail that in someday soon will probably be in the same position. It may not be 100 acres, but it's going to be in a very, it's going to, I think, follow a potential similar path in terms of re-envisioning, revitalizing, reimagining. And so in many ways, Citrus Heights I describe as a bellwether community. And you are in some ways first out of the gate on such a massive scale, large scale project like this to re-envision. You're built out as a community. You can't grow out. You have to kind of, think from within and revitalize from within. So we're strongly supportive of this project and really do want to help you make it a model for the region, because we think the rest of the region is going to have similar opportunities if we don't already. So it is not, I think, a one-off, but it is certainly a lead by example. So anything we can do to keep helping you all. Great work.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, James. Yeah, and thanks. It's true. I mean, I wish I had 100-acre mall that I could reimagine in Placerville, but you're right. I mean, we do have strip malls and other things that are going to be undergoing, similar metamorphosis. So thank you. All right. So we will then go and move on to our second information item. And this is the working draft for the Racial Equity Action Plan. And Casey has this presentation for us. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you, Chair Saragosa. This is an information item that we are bringing to all 3 board committees this month. And so Lunar is our final stop. I'd like to give you a little bit of background on this working draft racial equity action plan. So if you recall, back in February, your board adopted a racial equity statement of change and commitment that was developed by the Race Equity Inclusion Working Group. And right after that adoption, SACOG started to follow through on the commitments in that statement, with the first of those being listen and learn. So we hired a racial equity consultant to advise us through the development of a racial equity action plan, and also to conduct listening sessions with stakeholders. And so we invited city and county managers or their designees, our transit agencies, our 2 RTPA partners, SACOG staff. We also reached out to tribal governments to try to invite them to listening sessions to give us input into what SACOG should be focusing on in our racial equity action plan. We also had individual conversations with the members of the REI working group, and all of the learnings from those listening sessions are reflected as much as we possibly could directly into this working draft action plan. Your staff developed this with the guidance and advice of the consultant that we hired, that's Venture with Purpose. And that this working draft was presented to the Race Equity Inclusion Working Group at its July 29th meeting for us to get a check-in with them on the goals and objectives in the plan. We asked them questions like, we asked them a few questions. One, what are they excited about in the plan they see thus far? What do they see as challenges or controversial? What's missing? What should be prioritized? And these are questions that we would like to ask of you. We are asking them of all of the committee members as well. We also, at the same time that we sent it to the Race Equity Inclusion Working Group, sent it back out to all the stakeholders we had invited, regardless of whether they attended a listening session or not, to let them know this is what we were producing with those listening sessions, asking for their feedback. We have received some feedback, generally all still moving this, I think, honing it and trying to move it towards the direction of conclusion. And we are now trying to take feedback that we have received, including what we get through this set of committees, to finalize the action plan and bring it back to the Race Equity Inclusion Working Group at its September 30th meeting. We hope that the working group at that time will finalize the action plan and recommend it forward to the Policy and Innovation Committee in October to recommend to your full board for adoption. And in stakeholders, did I mention community-based organizations? I don't know if I did. I want to make sure we know that that was another group that we had reached out to and did have almost a dozen participate. So what I'd like to do now is we have questions up on the screen. These are the questions that I hope that you will keep in mind, and we'd like to walk through the goals and objectives with you to get you familiar with them, and also again ask for your feedback on them. If you, as I go through this, if you have been able to read through this, you'll notice there's not necessarily timing or specific actions in this draft, because it is a working draft. We stopped short of getting into the details so that we could go through this next round of asking for feedback to be able to bring it to a final step of putting some specific times and actions to it. So if there are no questions on process, I'd like to start us walking through those goals and objectives.
Yeah, any questions, anybody?
No.
Okay.
No. All right.
Great. Okay. 3 focus areas in this. The first is internal operations. The second is our programs, which is all the external facing does. And then the third area is board practice. So Eric, James and I will be taking you through each of those sections. So go ahead, Eric.
Thanks, Casey. So the first area, as Casey mentioned, is operations, and there's 3 goals in this area. The first 2 focus on our people. The third focuses on our procurement and contracting practices. So I'll start by walking through this first goal here, which is to establish a safe and inclusive workplace for all current and future employees. And the main components of this are the objectives that really focus on training. How do we train our staff to implement this whole plan really and understand the communities that we're working with, as well as how to increase their understanding of racial equity and inclusion in the work we're doing internal to the organization as a staff. And then the final piece of this one that I think is important to highlight is tracking and reporting on organizational demographics. Understand who's applying to SACOG, who's interested in working here, what's the profile of our staff across all different levels of the organization, and is that changing over time, to give us a really good baseline, which you'll see show up in other objectives throughout the Racial Equity Action Plan. The second goal is to identify, attract, invest in, and retain a workforce that reflects the diversity of our region. And here we're really looking at not creating SACOG as a household name, but ensuring that people who have the skills that we're looking to understand that there's employment opportunities at SACOG, and that they're aware and feel included to come and try to work at SACOG. And so this is looking at ensuring people who are, again, in these fields are aware that SACOG exists. And then we're going deeper on this and ensuring that as we're reviewing those applications and interviewing folks, that our current staff understand the biases that we all have, and we understand and mitigate for those, so that we're giving a fair chance to everybody who is interested in working here. And then continuing on to the third goal, this is about reducing barriers to SACOG's procurement and contracting processes. And so we acknowledge that SACOG works in a very constrained environment with state and federal requirements about what even our funding can be used for, let alone all the rules that are tied up in that. And yet we want to make sure that we have assessed things to ensure that we have not put up artificial barriers, and we're ensuring that businesses who may be able to provide services to SACOG are aware that SACOG exists, aware of the types of contracting opportunities that we have, and that where there are places where we can modify barriers that are not required, we're lowering those so that we can have a better diversity of suppliers and contractors that we're working with. And frankly, also just, saving public dollars by reducing barriers and the costs that go into services that we're trying to procure. So I'm happy to take any questions about the goals and objectives and operations, or any comments you have in this area before passing it back to Casey for programs.
Any questions?
Questions or, is there anything missing? Is there anything that you think we should prioritize that looks exciting or challenging? Any of that feedback we would love to get. And if not, we will move on to programs.
Yeah, I'll make a comment, Casey. I like the idea of, and I brought this up at REI committee as well, and you alluded on this as well, which is, there are some constraints about what staff can do in terms of like a Prop 209, things like that, where they're still in place in law. But to the extent that we have a very open process, one that people understand, that's easy to do, whether it's procurement opportunities, things like that, so that even if we have constraints on, say, you can't say you're going to get X percentage of minority, what have you, but to the extent that people understand it's a level playing field, and that it's it's easy to come do procurement with us, or it's those opportunities are out there, that we're listing in the right places, so that we're getting diverse firms that want to come and do work with us, I think are important things to have out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. All right.
Yes, Mr. Director Harris had his head up, so you had a comment or a question?
I was just I'm glad you said that, because I was gonna ask the question of, engaging more businesses owned by people of color in the procurement process. I was gonna just try to clarify that we're not going to reach out simply because they are of color. You know what I mean? There's got to be more to it than that. I think maybe reaching out to those folks who maybe not have been aware that they had an opportunity to do business with us, and provide them an opportunity. And like you said, Mike, the level playing field. Just by virtue of the color of somebody's skin, I think that's we're kind of going reverse direction, but provide the opportunity. So I just want to comment on that.
Yep, very good.
Okay, we will move on to programs then. So the first goal in programs is about engaging community representatives of Black, Indigenous, Asian, Pacific Islander, Hispanic, Latino, and communities of color, along with low-income, rural, urban, and other underrepresented communities, to help shape SACOG's projects and programs. So this goal and all of the objectives within is a direct product of a very, very loud theme that came from all of our listening sessions and one-on-ones with the REI working group members, which is SACOG, you are a government agency, and all government agencies, you all need to do a much better job, try harder to understand who the community is that you serve. So that is, and also note that you are an incredibly diverse region, as we know. That's part of why this statement includes so many different identities within it. And so knowing that SACOG is not a direct service provider, the objectives that we have identified in here are really trying to speak to that. So the first objective you'll see is about investing in strengthening partnerships with community representatives, leaders, organizations, by trying to work with the organizations that actually serve individuals and individual communities within the region, because we aren't going to be a household name, as Eric was saying. So this is trying to establish some stronger relationship with and through our local government partners so that when we are doing projects and plans, like when we're doing a long-range plan update, when we're designing a funding round and we have to receive public input, that we have some channels already built so that we can really more effectively receive that input and incorporate it into our projects and programs. The second objective calls out our blueprint engagement process specifically because we are just about to launch into the update of that blueprint. And so this is now the time for us to design our community engagement process so that we can try to have specific strategies to engage communities of color and underrepresented communities. And then our third objective speaks to tribal governments specifically. We have to engage tribal governments in the update of our plan. We have to try to reach out to them. It has, we will admit, been transactional and it has not worked very well in the past. And so what we're trying to do is to say, okay, let's try to step away from like the things that we must do to try SACOG to try to do a better job of just continuing to try to engage regardless of whether we are in the middle of updating our long range plan or not. The second goal is to increase funding for programs and projects that prioritize race, equity, and inclusion and/or are specifically engaging underrepresented and underserved communities in the SACOG region. And there are a number of objectives that are focused on this. One of them is the first one through the update of our long-range plan, which we are calling the blueprint, to try to formalize a long-term commitment to support our Engage, Empower, Implement program. That program your board created in the last funding round. And so we are piloting that now, but we hope that that program is to develop a pipeline of projects that are co-created by local governments and communities so that we have projects that are literally coming from what community has asked for.
And Casey, I'll just jump in real fast right here, if you don't mind. Just to underscore, I mean, the REI committee, this was a real emphasis, I think, on the committee to just, because, you know, we came up with like our racial equity statement and, you know, we had our discussions around that, but to really, you know, I think to formalize that and to making sure that it's part of the thinking as we go forward, so that it's not just sort of a plan on a shelf that we said we did it and we're done with it, but to really operationalize that as well. So I just wanted to kind of underline that from the REI's group's perspective as well.
Thank you very much for that. You please do jump in at any point throughout this, Director Zaragoza, because I think it really helps to enrich the discussion that the working group has been having. The second objective is about investing in leadership and talent pipeline programs that contribute to increased diversity in the field of planning. So there's a couple of things that we are thinking about here. Again, really learning this from the listening sessions. One, we have youth was identified a couple of times throughout this. So the Youth Leadership Academy that SACOG already has, we think is a really great program we can double down on, but also working with the professional organizations in the region that are also trying to develop their pipeline for the profession. That is a really great way for us to, it kind of dovetails with some of the operations goals of trying to make sure that all of the professions that go into the work that SACOG does and our member agencies do, that we are working with them to try to expand the awareness of these professions and continue to bring well-qualified people into the work that we all do. And then the last objective under this goal, to evaluate SACOG's major programs and planning work, to identify opportunities to increase racial equity and reduce disparities. This is, we need to do this evaluation so that we actually understand like what we are trying to change, to be able to see what's our baseline we're starting from and how can we make an impact. So this is trying to start us with measuring and continuing to learn from that. And then our last goal here is, again, you know, I could say this of all the goals, like loud and clear, this is what we heard from listening sessions, but this one about SACOG supporting and learning from members and local partner agencies that are incorporating racial equity best practices into their planning work came from both the government stakeholders we listen to, as well as those who are not in government. our member agencies and our partner agencies, we are seeing are on this, this spectrum of some are still trying to figure out what racial equity work might mean in their community. And some have been doing this for a while. And what we can do as a Council of Governments is to be a forum and convene all of those different parties to be able to learn from each other. And that's what the objectives with this goal are trying to set us up to be able to do. And with that, that's a summary of our program goals. And I'd like to pause here and see if there's any discussion or questions.
Thank you, Casey. Any comments or questions at this point? Seeing none.
I'll just
Director Gore has.
jump in.
Yes.
Thank you,
Yep.
appreciate that. And I participated in last year's conversations, but not the conversations with the goal setting. And I think that you all have done a really good job, a really balanced job of looking at areas where we can move the needle, where we can educate, where we can engage with different communities and provide opportunity. So I think you've done a really excellent job. I can only imagine how much work it has been with all the different groups of people, but based on the work that I've done myself, engaging in these types of things, I think this is really well done. I mean, I think that I know I looked at the original plan and Scott, you're trying to figure out what your timelines are, but I think this is a well done job. I know it's taken a lot of time and effort, but it's clear that you've really listened to folks and put into the strategies things that I think will make a difference in our region, and will also support our local jurisdictions, which I think is helpful, especially, there might be an interest to do this, but not a lot of capacity.
Yes.
So I appreciate that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Gore. And the other comments, I will say on the second to last thing there, in terms of learning and skill building opportunities, maybe quarterly. I think monthly might be overtaxing our the rest of our staff there on stuff, and maybe not. It's probably not going to be as meaningful if that was the case. So that might be a little too adventurous.
Thank you for that feedback. This is all exactly the type of thing we're looking for. Okay. If there are no other comments on programs, James will bring us home.
I'll take it home
Board
on
practice.
board. Yeah. So again, just to orient folks. So, Eric covered sort of operations, staff, people, procurement. Casey just went over all the stuff we do as an agency, all the work we do. And so I'm gonna end on the board practice, which and I think, Director Gore, you just recognized this. It has been a lot of work. It's been a lot of input too. I mean, this is what actually has been really, I think, really impressive to me about this process as it's supposed to be, right? As we're saying, we're trying to be better at is listening, learning, getting input and ideas. The flip side of that is, I think somebody mentioned, this is a lot of work, and it is not intended to be something we are going to do all of in the next 2 years, right? So that's the process we're now in the middle of, is actually trying to, as Casey said earlier, put some measurable objectives, some timelines to this, and just, I think the REI working group has done a really nice job, and our staff's done a nice job being very consistent the last 2 years. We're going to do a racial equity statement, we're going to do a racial equity action plan, and we're going to see what we can do in the long-range plan to incorporate equity. We focus like a laser on those three things, and I think to great benefit. The other thing I want to say, it didn't really come up under people and the diversity of our staff, but I want to, and a comment was made this morning about, is that we're going to still hire the best and the most talented people, and I wanted to give you my sense of absolutely. And part, I think, of what we need to do better is to make sure that people know if this profession of planning and engineering has traditionally been dominated by white males. That is especially engineering. And so we want to know, we want people to feel if they walk in the door, regardless of who you are, you feel welcome, you feel like you belong, you feel included, you feel seen, right? And it doesn't happen on the natural, right? We have to be intentional about that. We have to change a bit of a dominant culture around that. We have to be thoughtful or to be inclusive, right? So I just want to say that because I think it's just important, and we have work to do that and to get there. But this is a series of commitments to try, right? And I think all of our government agencies, right? I think we're all in that same boat. Is how do we develop a safe, welcoming, inclusive, belonging work environment that people want to come back to, and people want to stay in. So just my take on that first. Okay, back to board. So 3 goals on the board. Would love to get your thoughts on this if this is the first time you're hearing it or you're thinking about it. Number 1 is kind of continuing our listen and learn, which is really continuing to understand our region, the differences in our region and the disparities in our region. When we talk about racial equity, and I know we've had a lot of this conversation, and I appreciate it, and Chair Saragosa, you know this. When we say equity, what we want to do is lead with the first question about race and ethnicity. And it's sometimes a very uncomfortable question, but we want to lead with it first because it is the uncomfortable question sometimes, right? And we want to understand disparities by race, ethnicity. But we also understand that there are inequities by income, there are inequities by geography, and sometimes those inequities compound one another. And we believe we still need to do a better job. I'll just speak for ourselves as staff at actually truly understanding the region in which we live and we serve. You all understand your own communities, but I think the extent of the disparities and the levers we can pull to address those, we still think we've got work to do. And we suggest that the board itself has opportunities through the workshops, through speakers, even through, as we have in the last objective here, in an internal study mission, so we've got trips to Salt Lake and San Diego and Denver a few years ago, but what about something within the region? What about actually understanding communities right here within our 6 counties? And then I'm just going to jump back to the second objective here, which is also making sure, as I know we will have some turnover again on our board, as we do every 2 years. Starting in January, we'll have new board members. We don't know how many, but we know there'll be some new ones. So making sure that we are providing a very intentional primer for those new board members around. We will do that for all of our work, but in particular this racial equity work, because it's so new, but we want to maintain its momentum and its relevance, and including a refresher for returning board members. So we are proposing to do that in the beginning of next year as we onboard new board members and welcome back returning board members. Okay, next slide. Second goal is, as you remember from the board retreat and from our discussions around the blueprint, the upcoming long-range plan and the triple bottom line and equity, economy, environment, we want to continue to bring back to you the equity and racial equity impacts of the decisions that are in front of you as a board. So there's a number of ways in which we can do that. One of which is just like we were mentioning internal study missions and actually bringing community stakeholders and community voices to the board itself. On a more regular basis. We're developing a community voices committee, which would be a standing committee of community-based organizations around 6 counties. We're going to ask for your help to identify some of those stakeholders. But we think we can be more regular and more intentional around bringing those voices here. And then the second objective here is trying to figure out if we can apply some standardized methodology so that you can understand, will make it easier for you or more transparent in terms of the equity impacts of the decisions in front of you. We just had a discussion this morning about the 4 county transportation funding grant awards, right? So we had that discussion 2 years ago. It will be coming back in front of the board. How can we actually invest in transportation projects that actually address equity and racial equity and reduce disparities, increase access to opportunity, right? And how can we put those things in front of you in a way that is understandable and somewhat, again, sort of standardized. So next slide, which is the last goal under board practice. And that is, like all plans, our intention is not to have this just be a plan that sits on the website, but is actually, it's an action plan because we're acting, we're implementing. And so our question for you on this one is, well, the goal is to make sure that there's consistent engagement. And really the question for you is how. So for instance, we could do regular progress reports on plan implementation. This says every meeting. You can weigh in on, is that every meeting? Is it, how do we maintain a balance between being frequent, but also being substantive, right? We don't want a standing agenda item with nothing to report on an occasional meeting. So give us a bit of a sense, if you can, on frequency. And then second, and to wrap all of this up, our working groups turnover. I mean, every couple of years with a new board chair, new board members, it's a chance to rethink working groups. It's certainly our recommendation, I can tell you right now, that we think the Race Equity Inclusion Working Group should continue in some form next year under new board leadership, but perhaps it has a different charge. Perhaps the charge of the Race Equity Inclusion Working Group is to oversee the implementation of the Racial Equity Action Plan. So this REI working group blesses the plan. We will take the plan to the board, the full board, for adoption in October. But perhaps an REI working group next year might be overseeing implementation. And that could include board members, could include city and county staff. It could include special district and transit agency staff. It could include community-based organizations, philanthropic organizations, right? In some ways, the network of the people who are engaged in the implementation itself, right? So while I think it's been a great REI working group in terms of some of our state partners and thought partners and Cal Cities and giving, I think, a lot of us and you all who are part of that, being a sounding board, giving you ideas, giving you feedback. Perhaps the REI working group going forward next year is overseeing implementation. So, all right, with that, I conclude our joint presentation here. I know that's a lot, but we want to make sure you wrap your heads around it and give us some feedback, and we offer you some time. And from here, by the way, all of this will go back to the Race Equity Inclusion Working Group September 30th, end of September, and then we'll come back, as I said, to the board for adoption. And
thank you, James. Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Eric, for a ton of work on this and boiling it down for something that we can all wrap our heads around and have a good discussion about. So again, thank you for that. So just want to open it up really on all the everything that the three spoke about: concerns, questions, timing, any of those things that might, that folks may have want to discuss. I have a couple of things, but I'll wait and see what comes up.
I'll make one comment if I may, Chair Saragosa.
Yep, absolutely.
I like the idea of converting the REI working group into a group that sort of helps oversee implementation, because these are folks who actually know some of the groups you can reach out to, right? And continuing to have them be our partners as far as outreach and implementation, I think is a really excellent idea, because from what I could tell, they were very much engaged. And, if you're looking at how do you get the word out on projects to different groups, they're going to help us do that a lot more effectively than just us trying to do it on our own.
Thank you, Director Gore. Any other comments? And my comment is actually related to that as well, and that was, and I agree with Director Gore. My only concern on maybe changing that is when we say, do we want third parties that aren't SACOG members having quote unquote oversight of where the implementation plan may go. What that might look like, for us as an organization. But I don't disagree. I think these are the people that understand and know this the best. But I still want to make sure that at the end of the day, that it's going to be that the board doesn't feel like we're being fed something that then we have to take the medicine. It may be that way. I mean, it may come out that way, but I don't think that's the direction we wanted to take, though. So I don't want it to be confrontational. I guess that would be my one concern.
Saragosa, I agree with you, and I think we would have directors from the SACOG board participate in that oversight group along with the external partners. I think that would address that concern, right? Just like we have it now, right? We have board members or directors as well as community members, because you're absolutely right. We need to have directors a part of the oversight process.
Gotcha. Thank you. Any other, I like the idea, and one more thing that I thought has been very helpful for me was on some of the presentations is really, because it gives you you can hear things and you can read things, you can, hear presentations, but when you really see the visualizations of some stuff, I mean, just like the maps that show sort of the redlining that even decades later show how communities are still sort of segregated, just, and it doesn't matter where, whether they pick Detroit or Los Angeles or, wherever, those lines still existed. And I thought those were helpful just to kind of put into perspective some of the things that you might hear or maybe even question, but then you kind of see it and you see the real life aspects of that. So for me, that was very helpful to have those. I thought having those types of presentations are helpful to just give a more, for me, a fuller sense of some of the things that are going on that relate back to our mission. Again, like, I don't think, we're not trying to boil the ocean here. I mean, we're not going to solve racial inequities, but within our sphere of the world, what we can do to be better.
That's good. Thank you.
All right. Well, again, James, Eric, Casey, thank you. And this will come back to the REI committee, as James said, and then it'll go to the full board. So still a lot more conversation. And if you have something, like if you want to call me, you have other thoughts or anyone else that may be on the REI, I encourage you to do that as well. If there's something that we're missing, by all means, and, we'll carry that message forward as well.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you. All right. So we will move on to our last item, which are committee reports and anything that anyone may want to send to the group. I have one thing, but I'll wait for everybody else. All right, going once, going twice. All right. So if you're traveling up to Lake Tahoe this weekend, we have Green Means Go, or excuse me, not Green Means Go. We have Trip to Green. Sorry, a lot of greens. We have Trip to Green. So the lights through Placerville are going to stay green Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So we did it once already last month. We're doing it again this month. We're checking to see, really how if we can move traffic through. It worked fairly well the first time we did it last month. We're doing it again now, where we're going to have a much higher amount of vehicles coming through town and going up, whether they're going to Tahoe or other parts, other lakes and into Nevada. But we're going to see how that works. We're looking at alternatives. We know, the long-term one is maybe something that's very expensive, and whether or not that ever happens, but we're looking at other alternatives, and this is one of them where we're going to keep the lights green. So if you're traveling up, you should be able to sail through. Please still do stop in Placerville though and shop a little bit. But if you are coming back, you shouldn't have the backup. But also, if you are doing it, let us know your experience. We want to know how it worked, if it didn't work, or anything else. So just wanted to put that out there.
Director Saragosa, are you going to try that for the Apple Hill time? I'm
Yes.
guessing also.
Yes, so yes, absolutely. So next month we'll do it again. So that we're doing the three first weekends of the month, till August, September, October. So there'll be one during also during Apple Hill to see how it works.
Great. I'll know what day to pick.
Absolutely, yes.
Chair Saragosa, those of you on the strategic planning committee who were able to make it on Monday, we had a discussion on our draft strategic plan as an agency, and it was a good discussion, and I commend that to you. You'll see it. We'll discuss it the full board in September, and again, another media adoption item for October. But in that strategic plan, right, we talk a bit about sort of how we'll be successful and effective. And one of the buzzwords we've thrown in there is innovation, right? When we say innovation, people hear technology, autonomous cars, and all the cool stuff that I love. But actually, as we discussed last Monday, when we talk about innovation, we're really meaning, how do we solve our problems on a budget? How do we do creative problem solving? Because frankly, as we get into the next long range plan, you will be hearing this theme a lot if you haven't heard already. We cannot afford everything we say we want. So we have to solve problems thoughtfully and frankly, in a lean way, low cost. That's the innovation that we can't afford not to do in this region. And this is exactly the example, right, of at least trying something. Because as you said, the alternative, which is flyovers or, massive new infrastructure through the city of Placerville, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, honestly, when we would ever be able to accumulate, and Woody can tell you better than anybody, Woody Deloria, our partner, the kind of funding that would be needed for the kind of capacity project, the time it would take, the funds it would take. So if we can do things like this that could be effective, I just really commend your county, your city, Woody Deloria, all the folks. We've been writing about it, and so my fingers are crossed that those kinds of solutions actually could be much quicker and cheaper.
Thank you. Yes, and Caltrans has been a great partner on this as well. So you're right. Everybody sort of stepped up to the plate on this to look for a solution, or at least a help, something that may be helpful. So I appreciate that, James. All right. So with that, then it's 2:45, and I'll yield back to you all the rest of your afternoon. So thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a great Labor Day weekend.
Thanks, Michael.
Great to
Thank you,
see you.
Michael.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.